The Toronto Racquet Club was founded in 1905 and initially stood on Emily Street, close to the present location of Roy Thompson Hall. It was closed at the time of the First World War and reconstituted in 1924 at Bloor and St. George Streets in the converted coach house of the York Club. The present location opened in 1961 after the York Club venue was torn down to make room for the Toronto subway. What follows are excerpts from a series of interviews done with older members of the club between 2005 and 2008, an attempt to tour that elusive country, the past.
Some of the funniest memories and funniest games was we got Peter Barry and Don Leggett and Dave Ross and myself. And at that time, I had a cataract on my good eye, and I could hardly see the ball. And Don Leggett had a cataract that was getting worse, and he was waiting to have an operation, so he could only see a few of them. Peter Barry had all sorts of problems and couldn't move very well. And we used to have the most amazing games, and we had rules like you had to hit it right to the player. You couldn't hit it below the red line. You couldn't hit it too hard. No bad serves close to the wall. And we've been playing for about 3 or 4 years this way every Thursday. So it's a great bunch, and really is a laugh from start to finish. And sometimes we don't even know who won when we finish.
The old C team that used to get off of the court at about 10 after 8 and leave the club about 2 or 3 in the morning. There used to be a young lawyer here by the name of John Moffat, and as the two of us closed the bar one night, he announced to me that one of the great things that he did was he accepted a taxi pass from his dad. So because he was a lawyer, he didn't want to be driving under the influence. And I said, geez, John, that's really smart. So we showered, jumped in his car, and left.
They had got Brian McGee, who was a club member and the president of A.E. LePage, to look for land. And the boundaries were basically the University of Toronto, because that's where we'd been. And the land there was just too valuable. Well, one day I was playing with Eddie Ballin at noon at the York Club, and Eddie didn't drive, and he was always ordering me to drive him down to his office downtown. And he said, you know, is there another place? Do we have to be around the university? Can't we go into a cheaper place? And I said, well, you know, I do the plumbing for everybody. And I know a boat builder who's down on Seton Street. So we drove down, and as we drove down Bleecker Street, there was a sign which was 2 houses, which was being used for a cartage company, and it had a for sale sign. And Eddie took down the telephone number and found the price, phoned Doug Jennings, and I think the price was $25,000 or $30,000, which was way cheaper than any land around the university. And I remember Eddie's comment. He says, this is a terrific place to be. If some guy breaks their Achilles tendon, we just ship him off to the Wellesley Hospital and we hardly miss a shot.
In 1959, the Racquet Club was obliged to give up its premises on the property of the York Club because the subway was coming through, and it was because of that we had to come to a decision. And as we were short of funds, I had this gang affair at my house where people signed on foolscap. I wish to hell I still had that foolscap.
I joined the Toronto Racquet Club in 1970. At the time, the board of directors put prospective members through a very rigorous screening process, and I was very concerned when my application was before them, that I wasn't sufficiently well enough connected with current members to get through that process. And I did get through the process, and I was very relieved at that. And it wasn't until a couple of months afterwards that one of the older members took me over to the wall where the pictures of the past presidents were and pointed out to me that it was my great-grandfather, Daniel Robert Wilkie, who had in fact founded the club, or at least been one of the founding members and was the first president.
Oh, well, John Fuller was always a challenge. He always had his ideas, and he was very specific about it, and I really laughed. He was one of the first to play on the new court. And he said, that court on the right-hand side is a quarter low. There's a quarter difference between the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And I thought, oh, that's impossible. And what's a quarter of an inch anyway? It was a quarter of an inch that he said, I'll be damned, I got a transit in here. And Sandbacker was still around. And I said, take a shot. I'm just curious. He was right. It was a quarter of an inch. I'm sure it still is today. Quarter of an inch low on the right-hand side. I really chuckled about that. So I'll be damned if John didn't bring it up at an annual meeting. So I said, I want to tell you a little story. I was over in Brenchley, Kent, and between the cross and the main body of the church, they built a squash court. But the church was 800 years old, and the church had moved substantially, and you were actually playing in a parallelogram. And so I said, now you're worried about a quarter of an inch, and these are county games that count in England in the all-English squash tournaments, and they play in a parallelogram. So let's not get overly excited about a quarter of an inch. And that just brought the house down. That was the end of that.
Well, the war had been on for a couple of years when I joined the racket club, and they were getting pretty hard up for members. I remember the fee to join was $10. That was in 1941. The racket club was located in the old stables of the York Club, corner of St. George and Bloor. As you know, there were no horses around, unless some of the squash players might be so called. But there were two courts and a gallery, one of them, only one. There were 3 cubicles where you changed, and nobody had their locker there. It was pretty primitive, but it was also great camaraderie because everybody knew each other pretty well.
The club is the oldest purely squash club in the world. There are other clubs where squash has been played longer, but as a separate entity for squash, this is the oldest club in the world, and that indeed was 100 years ago.
Okay, so Jerry was a lawyer. Jerry has a distinguishing story of driving home without 2 tires on his car. We did have a problem, actually, before the police arrangement. Sometimes your car was jacked up and the wheels were just literally taken off because the parking lot was at the back of the club at that time and the entrance was on the south side.
And so it was always a great debate. But the one thing that always killed the debate very quickly is that we could not afford to put in the facilities that would be required to have women as members. We couldn't have a separate locker room. We couldn't have a separate shower.
It's actually the very principle of which attracts me to the club. The women have their club, we have our club. It's good to sit around, smoke a cigar, sit around with a towel on, and say things that you normally wouldn't say. So, quite frankly, it's a men's club, should be a men's club, and as long as that's not shown to my daughter and my wife, I think that's my stance on that.
Well, we opened with about 70 members. I can tell you it grew very quickly. Doug Jennings was the president at the time. He was a lawyer with I forget which firm, but he actually drew the plans for the club. We didn't hire an architect. I didn't move back to Toronto till 1962. When I joined, I was asked to be a director again, and I was also asked to take on the treasurer's job because the finances were in rather poor shape. In fact, I think at one time the Liquor Control Board was threatening to take away our license, and another time the Hydro were going to close our lights up because the bills hadn't been paid or some infraction had been made.
I get the impression that the International Court came in on time and on budget, and after it was completed, everybody was happy?
Yes, it actually came on at $155,000, and I was so determined that I was going to be right about it that I quietly paid the $5,000, so it came in at $150, right on the nose. I don't think, maybe $150. I think I left $100 one way or the other, and just to make it look good. But anyway, it was, it did. It came in no problems at all.
Well, you might call it primitive. There's a good deal of sweat around because when people came off the court, they just hung their clothes up in the cubicles where they were changing. And then I think the steward would take them and dry them out on the radiators they had. But people who joined there probably didn't want to pay a lot of money to join a big club, and yet they wanted to play squash.
Somebody said, "Why are you playing so long?" And I said, "Well, I'm afraid to stop. It keeps me in good trim."
But I've been playing squash or going on the court for 47 years, and it just gets better every day. I think some of my fondest memories are my doubles partners. I've had 6'4". I've had 5'8". The 6'4" partner, Al Vaughan, never said a word in 20 years. The bald little plumber who was 5'8" was always trying to protect me. I've had loudmouth partners. I've had quiet partners, fat partners, slim partners. But the one thing about it is we always had a great time, and one dubious let somewhere in the game, usually at 16-all, game 5.
We always had a deficit every year, which was picked up by Bobby Laidlaw, who would send us a check every year to exactly the penny of what the deficit was. But when I became president after Scotty Firstbrook, I became a member in '56, I think it was, and when we were behind the old club, the York Club. And fortunately, Peter Ray had just retired from the bank and said that he would become the general manager. And Peter pushed every nickel through a strainer. And I guess the first year I was president, maybe the second, we made a profit of $538.23. And but that was due to Peter Ray. I did very little. I just kind of took all the plaudits for it. And so I went up to see Bobby Laidlaw and gave him the financial statement, and he says, "Don't send me the check for the profit."
I guess my final comment, I've been a member here for 46 years. Every time I've come in the club, I've been subject to verbal abuse, and I've loved every second of it. You can't have an ego in this club.
And really, the culture of the club and the basic ambiance hasn't changed, and the reason it probably hasn't is because of the longevity of a great many of the members. And you've got a few dozen members that have been here for decades. I'm over club, but there's only one club that I really care about, and that's the Toronto Racquet Club.
Well, the doubles wasn't a very high standard, at that time, but.
Well,
tell me what time we're talking about. What date are we
Well,
talking?
that would be 1962 when they opened, I guess. When they opened the new building, new squash court. And yes, Chris Dobson, who had a knowledge of the game, and had played rackets in England, invited me to play with him, which I thought was quite a compliment, really. And somehow or other we got to the finals. I remember we were playing Jim Mason and somebody Conacher, and they won the first game quite easily, and we won the next three. And we won the first doubles championship at the Racket Club.
It's a good place because there are good people. Now, I come over here nearly every day to do two things. I exercise and I socialize. I still haven't decided which has the most value for me. Certainly the society itself bears strongly upon my motivation to come over here. Well, here's how a day in the life at the Toronto Racket Club sometimes goes. They talk about character flaws and personality defects and follies and foibles, and they're very noisy. But underneath it all, I know, because I've listened to this and I've observed this for several years, they have an affection for one another. They're friends. So the sniping, the give and take, is kind of a backhanded way of expressing their affection for one another.
Well, no. What happened was that safety was an issue. Break-ins were an issue. And what we did is, well, first of all, the president of the club was on the police list, okay? If there's a break-in or something happened to the club, you were to be phoned first. And under my watch, one time I got called at 2 in the morning. It's the Toronto police, so Betsy looked to see if I was still there or not. Anyway, I went down, and there literally was somebody inside the club. There was somebody spread-eagled on a car out here with the policeman saying, now look, we want permission to go in. And they said, well, what we don't want you to do is take a look at him, because we don't want, you know, if you don't want to be a witness, okay? So this was prevalent. So one of the things we did is we got to the chief at the local police station and made an arrangement that they could play squash from 12 in the morning till 6 in the morning. And they ran a league here, and we didn't have a problem because we had police cars and we had undercover cars and stuff in the parking lot, and insurance dropped, and it was a great deal.
Well, my younger niece had occasion to give me a ride at the Racket Club one weekend. First of all, they didn't want her in the club at all when she knocked on the door. I happened to be upstairs. And she's outspoken. She didn't even wait until we got into the car, but she said, "What a dump." And I've heard other members whose daughters have said the same thing. They just are not used to this severely Spartan environment that we have here.
There was a knock on the door when I was there in the morning, I think it was. And I used to go in the morning and do the books and look after what had been sold and so on. I opened the door, and there was a policeman. And he looked at me and he said, "What kind of a racket are you running here?" He'd seen this sign, Toronto Racket Club, I guess, on the outside of the building. So I took him upstairs, and fortunately there were some people playing, and I explained what rackets was all about, because squash rackets is really the name of our game. And I think in the end he was convinced that we didn't run a racket.
We give free squash balls. I mean, no other club in the world does that. And the deal was, originally, was to play the game of squash at a reasonable fee for its members. And for men. And they've never changed from that. They've tried to keep it a reasonable place. And so you get people here. There are some very wealthy members of this club who love to come here so they don't have to put up with the pretentious ways of other clubs. And it's a great place to come and hide from the world.
The club, for me personally, the club at times has been almost a sanctuary for me. It was a place I could get away from business issues, from particular things when things were not going quite well, and squash is very therapeutic to me. And I could come here, and as I said, it was a very egalitarian club. It didn't matter who was here. And I had a huge circle of friends from this club that I don't think I would ever have met if I just met people in my particular profession or my whatever, social background I had, and they're great guys.
The move was in '59 then?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Because we got some money from selling the old place to the TDC.
Yeah.
And and debt has always been a problem here, Sam. They've never liked it, which is a good thing. And we burned the bonds once and don't want to have to do them again, I guess.
Yeah, we've talked about that in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
And how much longer do you see yourself being active?
Another 60 years.
60, that's it?
That's right.
Okay.